I'm a biology professor and usually write about science. My specialty is entomology. I study insects. So this book is kind of outside my usual realm. I've always wanted to find a way to catch up with and write about the guys that I collected as a kid. I'm a child of the late 80s and the junk wax era, and have bought thousands of cards and hundreds of packs, and always was a little bit strange because my favorite players were not the Roger Clemens and the Barry Bonds of the world. They were the Rance Mullinicks and the Don Carmens of the world. And I always wondered what happened to them. That where are they now theme, I think, is resonant in any industry. And realizing that I don't know the players anymore because I don't really collect the cards got me thinking about those cards from my childhood, which got me thinking about how we would buy the wax packs, which got me thinking, what a cool device to center a book around a pack. What you would think would be my holy grail cards in that pack would be the Carlton Fisks and the Doc Goodins, but I had an opposite reaction for two reasons. One, those weren't the guys that I liked as a kid. And two, I just knew from a practical standpoint that trying to track down and get Carlton Fisk or Doc Gooden to talk to me would be a tall order, not having any special connections in the sports writing industry. So I had like an ugh feeling when I saw those guys versus like absolute delight when I saw Randy Reddy and Lee Mazzilli and some of these guys that were not the stars. But I also thought that I always had a hunch that those guys would be much more interesting from a journalistic standpoint because their stories haven't been told. And yet they were there seeing the same things that Carlton Fisk and Doc Gooden saw, but they haven't been asked 1,000 times about those things. I really tried to capture the place, right? So when I write about a small town of a few hundred people in western Oklahoma, where Don Carmen grew up, I can contrast that with Compton and Watts, where Al Cowens grew up. And it was important for me that the book be as much a sensory experience for the reader as possible and show them the environment in which these guys grew up in so they could appreciate the differences and the similarities. And so I go through 30 states in 11,000 miles in 49 days and all across the country and write about these different places. These moments of sitting in Gary Templeton's living room watching Kung Fu movies and having him critique Matt Kemp's swing, right? Or sitting in Rick Sutcliffe's car and Ryan Sandberg calls, and and it's funny because I can see the screen of his phone, and it says like Ryan S, and that's just surreal, right? Some of the serious stuff with Don Carmen sitting in a zoo and having him really open up and be so vulnerable about his relationship with his dad, sitting at Rance Mullinic's dinner table and saying grace with his family. These are, these memories that I think I appreciated on the trip as I was going, that this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing, so I really got the most out of it. Then the theme started emerging, which is father and son. So many of these guys having had strained or broken relationships with their fathers growing up or even now, and how that impacted them as players and as people, how they tried to not repeat history with their own kids. The challenge of being 35 and never being able to play baseball again, and what you do with the rest of your life. And so inevitably these guys went through a period of often divorce, depression, drinking. So leaning into that, finding out what that was like. Didn't know when I set out that a book on a pack of baseball cards would intersect with race politics and relationships with spouses and kids. But for me, it was always about telling the human story behind the cards. I was left wondering, how much are people thinking about like the humanity behind these cards versus investment potential? At least for me, that's what ultimately makes cards valuable, is not the literal monetary value, but the representation of these personalities that occupy a very rarefied place in our society. And what does that mean? What is the cost and the benefit of that? I think that's one of the take-home messages of the book is that you'll probably read it and walk away like, oh, like I have a lot more in common with the Major League Baseball players than I ever realized.